Hello, guys, and welcome to the Rise Summit. Today, I have a guest by the name of Dr. Joan Rosenberg, and she's a best-selling author, consultant, master clinician, and media host. Dr. Joan Rosenberg is a cutting-edge psychologist who is known as an innovative thinker, acclaimed speaker, and trainer. As a two-time TEDx speaker and member of the Association of Transformational Leaders, she has been recognized for her thought leadership and influence in personal development. Dr. Rosenberg has been featured in the documentaries I Am, The Miracle Mindset, Pursuing Happiness, and The Hidden Epidemic. She's been seen on CNN, America Morning, the OWN network, and PBS, as well as appearances and radio interviews in all of the major metropolitan markets. Welcome, Joan. So great to have you with us.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so as a leader of self-development, I feel that there is such a direct link between healing from trauma or even deciding to come off that victimhood mindset and into self-development.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. Excuse me, absolutely true. And I think the important thing here is that one needs to understand that it's going to take an effort. It doesn't come simply. And it does take effort, but when you put in that effort and you persist, and you have a desire to increase your awareness, and as to me, kind of the foundational piece to change, then that will make a big difference.
Right, and you just said it as it is, right? We're not going to sugarcoat it and say, "Oh."
No.
It's going to be by grace, although grace also can play a part, but it is really your choice to embark on that journey. And it takes not only choice, it takes some action, it takes some commitment, right?
Absolutely true. Yes, to both of those.
Both of those. So what does the journey of self-development look like, in your eyes? How would you describe it best?
I would say a couple of different things. One is that, to me, as I said just a moment ago, awareness is a first step. Mm-hmm. And the second is to have kind of a destination that you want to change, and that you have a destination in mind. And the kind of questions I actually like to ask people is kind of, who do you want to be, and how do you want to show up? Mm-hmm. And those having answers to those questions starts to form, if you will, the arc of our journey. Right. And it's also with an awareness that nothing really changes in life until we change.
Yeah, I love that. Awareness is the first thing. So we actually know what we want, where we're going, and what we want to achieve or be in order to achieve that, right? And then clarity about who we want to be and who we want to show up, right?
Right, which means, and when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about the kind of values we want to embody. It's do I want to be a generous person? Do I want to be a loving person? Do I want to be a patient and kind person, right? Or are there other ways that I want to show up? So it's, in this case, it's getting some clarity about the attributes or the qualities or the values that you want to embody.
Right. So that takes some self-inquiry, right? To really dissect that essence, because sometimes people are not really sure who they want to become. Am I right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. No. Yes, it would. It would take taking a look at that, and that's, if you will, kind of, that's part of the time it takes. That's part of the effort. You have to take the time to even start to consider what you want that journey to look like. It's like, so it might be looking inward and going, what am I stuck? What kinds of things are keeping me stuck? What kinds of things do I have the most difficulty with? Where are the kind of, if I'm around people, where are the kind of problems that I typically have when I'm engaging with other people? What kind of feedback have I received from other people? in terms of things that they might say I would benefit from. So it takes a kind of an inward journey, finding the things that are not working terribly well. It's also considering the kinds of things that are working well. And it might also be looking at areas of your life, as a friend of mine might say, where there is longing and where there is discontent. And that all those kinds of things then begin to act as potentially as catalyst for that journey of self-development.
Right. So where we are at now is not, it's not set in stone, right? It's all can change and transform. And if they are maybe qualities of us that we resonate with less, or we rather not have, we can work them towards other values or qualities that we want more, right?
Yes. My thinking is, again, that what we know about the brain at this point is it's what people would call neuroplastic or neuroplasticity, which means that we have the possibility of change, and that we can even begin to understand that things that we might consider our personality traits are really long-standing, if you will, brain firing patterns. And so the beauty of it is that if we choose into becoming something else, that we can actually grow into that by developing new habit patterns around that. And what appeared to be an old personality characteristic ceases to be that as you grow into someone else you would much prefer to become.
Right. You just said it so beautifully. And there is such a consensus between all the people that actually be, on this summit, and especially the conversation that I had with Bob Doyle that was featured in The Secret, that says exactly the same, that, we know today that our wiring is changing and transforming right throughout our life. And
yes.
It's really about creating new neurological pathways to replace the old wired ones that are so
right.
well established over maybe many years. So when we create new ones, they, might need more effort to direct the energy there, right? We sometimes may fall onto the old familiar patterns, but as much as we practice the new ones and consistently with awareness, we can develop really new wiring altogether and new personality traits, right?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely true. Yes. Yeah. That again, to me, that's a great message of transformation in and of itself. The notion that we can change if literally we put our mind to something different.
Right. And this is really empowering because the power is in our hands. And so even if we experience trauma or adversity or challenge, and perhaps we have some unprocessed emotions about it. So it's really a good practice to process those emotions, to feel all the feelings, not to suppress anything. What we feel can heal, but we don't have to stay there. So we can process that trauma and then let that go and choose to become the heroes of our life and really wire ourselves to become the person that we want to become.
That absolutely true. Yes, we are totally aligned on that. Yes, definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I hear you say we have to start asking ourselves many questions. And
right.
It's really picking that curiosity about ourselves and noticing our patterns and noticing how we behave in certain circumstances, certain relationships, certain dynamics, so we can collect that data and really look at it, from an authentic point of view, without covering it in pretty, right?
No, not bows and ribbons. Correct.
No bows and ribbons.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then also, it's the place to say that we all on this journey of self-development. So I'm sure, I've been on that journey for decades, and I'm still working towards a better me, a better self. And it's a daily work. I know what I need to do to keep my vibration high, whether it's my morning practice, whether it's my nutrition or exercise, things that I do it daily. And I'm sure you do too.
Right. No, and I consider this idea of even of kindness or love or patience. I consider all of those a daily practice. So it's not a matter of that any given day I don't get to practice that. It's every day is a practice of that.
Right.
So in a similar way that you might be paying attention to nutrition and exercise, as you just said, it's also paying attention to embodying the qualities I say I want to be. So if the only way to practice it is to be it.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
or the only way to be it is to practice it. Either way you want to look at it. But it's thinking about, again, thinking very consciously about the qualities, attributes, characteristics you want to embody, and then thinking about that as, I don't know that it has to be effortful practice, but think of it as, or at least a conscious daily practice of those things.
Right. Yeah. And life is really the playground, right? All the right scenarios and tests will come along your way to practice whether you can cultivate it really in the true moment.
Yes, and that's every day, and it's with the simplest of interactions. So
Right.
It could be the interaction of a good morning with a young child. It could be engagement with a parent. It doesn't matter what it is, or a loved one. Or even something as simple as an interaction at a grocery store. Right, is that we have many daily opportunities to practice embodying those characteristics.
Right. Yes, exactly. So it's really on a moment-to-moment basis that we check in to see whether the way we responded or reacted or behaved to someone else is aligned to our core values. And maybe sometimes we also fail to embody that, and then great, then we feel that dissonance right away, isn't
right.
it?
Well, and the thing there is to think about it as an opportunity for both repair and also repatterning. So that, yes, so that what you want to do is, when you noticed you were out of alignment with who you wanted to be, that you stop and take stock of that. And if it's appropriate and you can do it, it would be then to make efforts to repair. And also then, in that regard, as you're repairing, you're also repatterning.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the practice. That's it.
Yes. Yeah. So that's one particular arc. The other arc, you and I talked briefly ahead of us starting about, there's a whole nother arc that I think about in relation to trauma, or what I might call difficult life experiences.
Yeah, go ahead, share with us, please.
I think about it. I think that, many times when people get into psychotherapy, and especially when they're doing kind of longer term therapy, meaning that they have the openness or the capacity to stay for more than just a few weeks, but they're staying for potentially months or even possibly years, that I think of therapy in that way as kind of a grieving process. And that so that the long arc of a more extended therapy time is actually going through grief. And I call what I talk about this, I call it dealing with kind of what I call disguised grief. And disguised grief is, for me, the gap between what we wanted, what we desired, what we needed, and what really happened, what we really got. So there's a gap there. And for me, there's a couple ways to understand disguised grief. And again, think about the process that I'd be talking about as a way to make your way through these difficult life experiences that actually allow you to kind of put them in the background and move on with greater ease, and to deal with the trauma. And so what does disguised grief look like? It starts out, if you will, with, you can know it by, if you listen for what I call grief signal words. And grief signal words to me are words like bitterness, envy, jealousy, cynicism, pessimism, grudges, resentment, longstanding anger, longstanding hurt. I mean, the list kind of goes on and on. I think I wrote a book called 90 Seconds to a Life You Love, and I think I identify 13 or 14 different words that you can use as grief signal words, but there's more words than I put in that book. And so the first thing is to understand is that you have grief underneath, if you will, if you're using those if you still have those kinds of reactions and still are using those kinds of words. And that would be that one way to understand disguised grief. The second way is to think about what I call categories of grief. And that we are left, especially when we've gone through difficult life experiences or had trauma that you're talking about, that one of these 5 categories are, so we have 2 different ways to understand it. One is through grief signal words. The next is these 5 categories. And the first category is understanding that we grieve over what we got and didn't deserve. So for any of us, that might be growing up in chaos, or it might be growing up in any kind of an abusive circumstance. The second is grieving over what we deserved and didn't get. Well, think of that as the good stuff. If the first one's the bad stuff, the second one's the good stuff. And in this case, we didn't get the praise or the nurturance or the consistent support or those kinds of things that we really needed and valued. So parents who didn't show up for track meets or volleyball games or cheerleading competitions or whatever it might be, or piano recitals, or that there was no encouragement or praise along the way, right? That would have helped us nurture ourselves as we grew. The third category is grieving over what never was. You can think about that as lost opportunities during the early stages of our life, so that it's kind of the facts and circumstances of what we grew up with early. It's grieving over what is not now. So think about it as the facts and circumstances of your current life, and they may be out of sync with what you really want them to be. And then the last one is actually grieving over what may never be. And that we all have some measure of this grief to deal with.
This is really eye-opener, and I felt goosebumps all over when you were talking about it, because I think it's really key to understand. This is something that probably most of us experience to some degree. I really a strong believer that we all have childhood wounds, simply because we carry them through epigenetic. It can be through the lineage, but also because we bred on this dysfunctional patriarchal society for so many decades that it's inevitable. Our parents could only do what they could with the best of intentions, but they also carried the wounds themselves and had to deal with their coping mechanisms.
Right.
Raising children is not easy. We all know that. And if there's not enough awareness, then that gap that you were talking about bound to happen, right?
Right. Yes, definitely. Yes.
And so we all have that internal grief to process at some point of our life. And if we not, then that will then express itself in all those different traits that you've mentioned, right?
Right. Yes. Yes. So a couple of a couple of things to understand about this is that part of the way I look at grief is that I understand grief as comprised of at least 4 feelings or feeling states. And so the ones that I listen for immediately are sadness, helplessness, anger, and disappointment. So individually,
sorry, what was the first
one? Sadness,
yeah.
Helplessness, anger, and disappointment. Because we talk about grief, but nobody says what's included in that, right? So for me, it's at least a minimum of those 4 feelings or feeling states. And that so that when we feel jealous or envious, or when we're cynical or pessimistic, or if we're holding grudges, or we're bitter or resentful, or whatever it might be, that underneath are at least those one or more of those 4 feelings. And that I would, again, so part of what I would have people do is shift off those words, the grief signal words, and allow themselves to go, oh, there's actually some grief here. I'm having reactions to stuff that either did happen and I didn't want it to, or didn't happen, or did happen and I didn't want it, right? So it's okay. Now we got that gap. Now we have some understanding of where to look, and that there really is a process of making your way through it. And that I think the most important thing that I think about in this regard is that in order to deal with the trauma that we've experienced, or these difficult life experiences, these wounds that you've talked about, it's understanding that it's actually having an awareness that what you want to do is to make sense of the meaning and impact that these life experiences had across time. So when they happened, they had an impact on you. As you aged, they may have carried some meaning or impact. And then right now, they may still having some impact. And so for me, it's a making sense of process that can actually help us then move through these traumatic wounds or difficult life experiences.
And can you talk a little bit about the process? Just so we have, maybe, I know it's probably a big topic and conversation, but just so we have a sense of it.
Sure. The first is being aware that you have the grief. In fact, you can think of it as using the word grief as your marker, if you will, or a way to remember the process. So the G is just acknowledging that grief is there. The R would be choosing any given life experience to work with. And the beauty of when we start to work with one life experience that's been difficult, and there's other ones like it, it's a little bit of a domino effect. It's not like you have to go through every single life experience you've had that's traumatic. It's that when there are things that resemble each other, that working through of one starts to help you actually work through potentially many. Because the same kind of insights or the same kinds of decisions you might make, or whatever it might be relative to those experiences, are going to be similar or the same. So the R would be identifying, reflecting, if you will. It's choosing a memory or an experience to work with. The I is really kind of the first meat of the whole thing, and that's inquiring more deeply. So what does it mean to inquire more deeply? Well, that's the questions you want to ask is, what was the meaning or impact these experiences had on me across time? So how are they relevant right now? What kind of decisions did I make when if I was left out of something, did I make the decision that I was unlovable, right? I have an example. I wrote a book called 90 Seconds to a Life You Love. And one of the examples I use in there is a man, he was 18, doing a solo, like a singing solo, as kind of a capstone experience at the end of his senior year. And his best friend came up to him and said, "You can't sing in public like that again. You sang so flat." And this man, this is a guy telling me, and he was in his 70s when he was telling me the story. He said he made a decision to never sing publicly again. And so here's a man who loved singing in groups, and made a decision at 18 to never sing publicly again. And to think of those 50 plus years where there was a joy that he then didn't experience, right? It's like to make sense of what that was like, to me, is very profound. So sometimes we make decisions based on our experiences that are actually worse for us and cause more hurt than if we dealt with the experience in and of itself by itself. So we want to, in my mind, we want to make that kind of an inquiry and start to understand that we can hold certain attitudes, we can hold certain beliefs, and we can make certain kind of decisions based on the trauma or the wound we experienced. And that's what that kind of deeper inquiry is about. The next step would be to what I call extract the good. So it's extracting whether there's any kind of positive learnings from what took place. And then the last step, the F, actually includes a couple other steps, and it means forgiving. And it doesn't mean just forgiving yourself. It means forgiving yourself and forgiving others. and in both cases, it's forgiving what one did or did not know, or what one did or did not do. And that goes for the self, and it also goes for the other. And when you get to that point, you actually get to kind of forge new images of who you want to become, and then to start to live into, as we were talking about at the beginning, to start to then embody that new person, to live. Make their way through trauma.
So you would just cut for the last bit of your sentence, if you can repeat it, if you remember what you said.
That's the process that I encourage people to use to make their way through these wounds, these difficult life experiences, or trauma.
This process is laid out in such a profound way. Thank you for that. That makes so much sense. And I can see that arc, and I have experienced it throughout my healing journey. I'm coming from a very dysfunctional childhood, and I had to meet that grief, right? I didn't know what it is, I didn't know how to call it. I feel that there was also the grief, you mentioned that word disappointment, of, the mother that I longed to have and never had, or the father that I longed to have and never had. And all that grief of, the loss of my childhood innocence. And
yes, that's part of it. That's part of it.
That's part of it. And I have never called it grief. And so it's really eye-opener for me to nail those feelings into what is in the foundation. So thank you for that.
You're so welcome. That's the way I look at the process, is that and to your point, I don't think that many understand that in order to make one's way through these things, we're grieving. We're literally grieving. And it's grieving over those categories of what we got and didn't deserve, and what we deserved and didn't get.
And would you say that it's a similar grief to, say, losing a person you love? Is that still, or do you see any distinction there? It's different. There are parallels, because the same feelings are present. I might feel sad, helpless, angry, and disappointed that somebody passed, right? So all of that may be absolutely true, except I'm not necessarily, especially if I'm grieving over somebody that I loved, then what I might reflect on is the impact that they had on my life, but it's not tied to trauma. In this case, it's taking in the richness of the connection, right? Or saying, that was so beautiful, I loved him so much, or loved her so much, I want to be more like them in a certain way, right? Or I want to take the learnings or the wisdom that they shared with me over time, and I just want to see if I can savor it, or show up in ways that they showed up in life. So it's a whole different kind of an experience, where there are conflictual relationships where someone died. Then I would say some of the meaning making may be similar, because some of the emotional stuff hasn't been resolved yet. And so, if somebody can work on resolving it before somebody passes, whether it's with them or without them, then the passing, I think, feels a little bit kind of cleaner, if you will. It's not as confusing. It's not as ambivalent about the losses. The loss is a more pure loss. And then we're really getting at more of the sadness and the disappointment. Yeah, thank you for that distinction. That makes a lot of sense. And so really, before we can create the new person that we're talking about, we have to grieve the old that is here, right? That's really the stepping stone, with the awareness, with the maybe deeper understanding that this is the arc of our life and this is the narrative, but nevertheless, it is in processing fully the unprocessed, right? What is still in there in our cells of the body, and through which we see our current reality, right? Because we have those lenses that are very much, it has to do with our experiences and what we think about ourselves and what we think about the world. So I think that by processing the emotions, we start to shatter a little bit of those identifications that we took on, that maybe not really who we are authentically.
And nor who we want to be. And I think to your point just a moment ago, what I have found is that this process actually allows somebody to more fully understand and accept the narrative of their own life. Mm-hmm. Dr. Dan Siegel talks about having being able to have a coherent narrative mm-hmm. for our lives. And what this does is allow us to kind of go, oh, okay, this was the arc of my life. I might not have wanted it. I absolutely didn't want it, and obviously didn't need it. Mm-hmm. But it's shaped who I've become. Now I can understand how I became who I am, mm-hmm. or the kind of decisions I made along the way, or all those kinds of things. And so we're more accepting of our own narrative. Mm-hmm. And then there's a way, because we're accepting that more, we actually feel more whole. And that's WHOLE, mm-hmm. right? We feel more complete. We feel more centered and more grounded inside. That without accepting that narrative, our life feels like sometimes disparate episodes of life, or those disparate experiences of life, and not this arc that we can actually make sense of. And I think there is a way to make sense of that arc. And because I've heard people, just recently, I remember working with somebody, and the person said, I don't want that narrative. It's like, well, this is your narrative, right? It's like, so in rejecting it, there's also ways in which the self gets rejected. Mm-hmm. So it becomes a very, very important process to make sense of those things.
Right. And what I know from our own experience and working with many clients is that when we make sense of that arc, as you were mentioning, we can actually see it going through generations. It's not only right to us in this lifetime. We can actually see it going further because we perpetuating those.
Right. Yes. Yep. Absolutely true. So yes. So you don't have to stop with just yours. You can actually start to understand, in the broader whole, in terms of how that links up with your ancestry.
Right, and really the essence of the message, if I have to really the essence of the message of this summit, is that life is happening for you and not to you. So whatever you have been through and whatever is your personal story is perfect for your soul evolution. This is what your soul is incarnated and chosen to go through. And you may call it challenges. You can also call it initiations. And those initiations, if you understand that, and if you're willing to accept them, and if you're willing to do that work that we've been talking about and go through the processes, you can then leverage that, and you can then deepen the depth of your being, or tap into qualities that you would never otherwise have been able to tap into. And this is really enriching your soul journey on this planet. And if you understand that, then you are also able to cultivate all your soul gifts that come together with your narrative, together with the experiences, so then you can then turn it into something amazing that will enrich other people's life in however way you choose to do that.
I totally 100% agree. And I like that you've identified them as initiations, if you will, as opposed to this quality. And you said this earlier, as opposed to seeing yourself as being victimized by it, that these are I think of it as they're catalysts, or there's the wounds that we've experienced are actually the portals to our growth.
Exactly. They are our allies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we have to go through that rabbit hole, right? So we can't superficially just witness it, resist it, suppress it, turn our back to it. That's not going to work. We really have to go through that portal, and that's through the rabbit hole, to feel all the feelings, to process all that needs to be processed, hopefully with a therapist, a guide, and helping hand, so you don't get lost in there. And then when you come out of the other side of it, you have a clearer vision of why this has happened, what did this contributed to your life, and who can you become because of it, and thanks to that.
Right, exactly. That all of that is true. And I'm totally aligned with you on that. Yes.
Right. Yeah, I'm super happy about this conversation, and I really, this was really moving for me, and I really thank you for all the work that you're doing and what you represent in the world. And I need to bring this conversation to a wrap. It was such a pleasure, and I just want to ask you if people want to work with you or follow you, what's the best way?
Well, they can certainly come to my website, drjoanrosenberg.com. I'm on Instagram and the other social media outlets like Twitter and Facebook, etc. Usually it's under Dr. Joan Rosenberg. And there's, I have a book, 90 Seconds to a Life You Love, that it captures much of what we just talked about, and a portion of it. And then there's 3 TED Talks that are out there. So if people want to find me and follow me, there's lots of places to do it. So I'm very, very also grateful for that.
Great. So we'll have all the links below. And from my heart to yours, thank you so much. And this is a goodbye from me, your host, Nuna Isi Ma. Thank you for being here, and blessings on your journey.
Thank you so much.